the Catholic community call the city Derry, the Protestant community call the city Londonderry. Despite the fact that this city's population is majority Catholic, the city's name still is officially Londonderry. The city council is Derry City Council, the port and harbour is the Londonderry Port and Harbour, but the airport remains the city of Derry Airport, so we're also very confused here. Take a look to your right, you'll see this little tower, not part of an old jail, but part of the wall, not part of the walls, should I say, but part of an old jail that was here right up as far as 1973. And you see this wall here on your right hand side is actually a segregating wall between a Catholic and a Protestant community. In other words, the other side of that wall is the Protestant community. You see the British flag flying here just on your right hand side. So again, you're seeing the change of the coin, the turning of the coin. Inside there is a wall which says, not you are now entering Free Derry, but Londonderry, West Bank Loyalists or Protestants, still under siege, no surrender. So this is a community inside here whose ancestry dates back predominantly to the 1600s when these walls were built. So these people inside here, inside that wall, inside that side of the wall, consider themselves certainly not Irish but British. And you see the difficulty. I mean, I have this funny notion that as long as there are Catholics and Protestants here in Northern Ireland, there will always be two different agendas. So the issues are not going to go away. We just have to try and tackle them in a different fashion. Can you all breathe in, please?
Breathe in, right.
You're the man, Mick. You're the man.
I was just wondering.
My mother gave me. I've been writing a diary since I've been 11. You see, and my mother was clearing out our rooms, and she came across these diaries I'd written when I arrived in a place called Logan Airport in Boston. And I'd never left Ireland before in my life. You see, and we were laughing at one section where I'd written that as we were waiting for our luggage to come out, my friend Michael, who's 6'7", looked down at me, and he said, "Ronan, you're dreaming." And I wrote in the diary, I said, "Michael, I love it here." And Michael's retort was, "But we haven't left the airport yet, Ronan." "But I love it here." He says, "Why?" I said, "Michael, look around you." I said, "Half the people here look like me." I was very impressed. If you look at my school photograph, it spot the odd one out. And so one of the things that struck me about the United States was its ethnic diversity. I mean, if you know, and I always remember one of the first books that I read when I was in the United States was a book reading about the history of the railways and reading about my ancestry, the Chinese and the Irish building railways across America. And it struck me that how important economics is, because the reason for your diversity is the same reason for our lack of it. In the opposite scale of there were no opportunities here. So there was nobody coming to Northern Ireland. And we still find it very difficult to keep our young people. I mean, you know, most of the students that I talk to all have ambitions to leave Northern Ireland. You know, in particular those ones that have, you know, that show signs of being very bright students who will do very well at university. And that's why we have to try and rebuild Northern Ireland up economically. One of the things that I noticed when I studied economics at university was that when Northern Ireland was calm, we often had very low rates of unemployment. When Northern Ireland was violent, we often had very high rates of unemployment. And just take the Second World War as a very simple example. You know, ironically, the Second World War was a time of great calm in Northern Ireland. And the reason being was that there were lots of jobs to service the nearly 750,000 servicemen and women passing through the waters of Northern Ireland. And I don't want you to take this the wrong way, because I'm only saying it tongue-in-cheek, but we almost lamented the ending of the Second World War here, because when the Allies left, the jobs left as well, and the unemployment rate started to rise and rise and rise. So by the outbreak of our civil conflict here in 1968, the unemployment rate had reached a level of 31%, and it's been very difficult for us to attract anything to Northern Ireland over the last 40 years. Now thankfully today, you see this lovely building here, it's called the Verbal Arts Centre. And this is a centre where we bring children from both communities, Catholic and Protestant, to try and get them to learn about each other's cultures and traditions through music, through art, through poetry, and it's also a centre for children with learning disabilities. It is so important for the next generation of young Catholics and Protestants to do things together, because we have a history of segregation here. You either have Catholic schools or Protestant schools, and there have been very few integrated schools over the last number of years. Slowly but surely, it's changing. And I was at 3 weddings in the last 6 months, and all 3 weddings took place between a young Catholic and a young Protestant. I'll just finally say to you that the image of Northern Ireland has been very bad. I always remember when I travelled that when I told people that I was from Northern Ireland, I often felt like I was an ambassador for here. I was constantly saying, most people in Northern Ireland are actually quite normal. Most people are just trying to get on with their lives. I always remember a quote from a great American friend of mine by the name of Mark Twain. And I always remember him once saying, those who do not listen to the news are uninformed, but those who do listen to the news are misinformed. And I always felt that was very true of Northern Ireland, and I think it's truer today than it has ever been. Are we all ready to march?
Yes.
You don't say yes here, you say aye. And if you really want to be from here, you say aye, surely. Call me Shirley again. The British Army had a huge base just inside this wall. And the base has just gone. So you will still see the legacy, as I said, of the recent past out everywhere. So you see all where those squares are just, there. There used to be a huge security fence. And, it's only a few years ago that I would say to people, now don't take photographs as we come off the coach, because there's a huge British Army military installation there. So it's now gone. There's no longer any soldiers on the streets here. And that's really wonderful, the fact that children who are now growing up, I suppose, in a more normalised Northern Ireland than what we experienced here during the 1970s and 80s. The building of these walls, by the way, as I said, spelled the beginning of the end of the Gaelic Irish rule and the beginning of English Scottish rule in the 1600s. In 1613, when these walls were being built, the city's name changed from Derry to Londonderry, and the controversy has surrounded the name ever since. So the walls are a mile in circumference, 4 original gates, but 7 gates in all today. Now everything you see this way is what we call the old, or the new city, and everything out here is the inside here is the old city. None of that housing would have existed during the 1600s. In fact, the river would have encircled almost 3/4 of the way around the old city, hence the name Shipquay Gate, Ferryquay Gate on the bogside. So these walls were very simply built to protect the British Empire, to protect the British against the possible Gaelic Irish insurgency, but also remember that the French and the Spanish were often trying to use Ireland as a gateway to get to the New World as well. I'm amazed the walls are still intact, considering all the trouble and strife we've had here over the last 400 years. They remain one of the finest examples of a walled city you're likely to see anywhere in the whole of Europe today. I was telling you about the young girl with the garbage bin lid. And I had these 16-year-old boys, you see, from Belfast here recently, and one of them asked me what the girl was doing with the garbage bin lid. And I explained to the boys that during the 1970s here, when the British Army or police would have been chasing an IRA suspect, the women and children would often be seen banging garbage bin lids on the ground to warn their community that the army were chasing one of their own people. And the boys were fascinated, and I said, now do any of you have any other questions? And one of the boys, Matthew, put up his hand and he said, yes sir. He says, why didn't they just use mobile phones? I looked at him again, you see, and he was so serious. And I went back went back to my wife that evening, and I told her the story, and I said, I says, darling, I says, I'm a little bit depressed. I says, I now realise that I'm of a different generation. Those boys think mobile phones are around forever. But when I wrote about it in my diary, what really struck me, and I actually got quite emotional about it, because I suppose we all forget that time goes by so quickly. I had forgotten, that those boys were only 4 years of age when the Good Friday Peace Agreement was signed. That those boys weren't even born when the IRA called their first ceasefire. So those boys are the new generation who don't remember any of this. And I just found that amazing, that these boys are coming from the bogside, but we now have a new generation of teenagers who have no recollection of what it was really like in 1970 or all through the 1970s and the early 1980s. So to me therein lies the hope, and to compare 1970 to 2010 is really like comparing night and day. Are we all ready to march?
Yes. Aye.
Aye, surely.
Aye, surely.
Aye, surely. Down in the city today, you think of all that war. And it wasn't that long ago that, Belfast, Baghdad and Beirut were all mentioned in the same breath, including this city here. And I had an Englishman on my tour during the summer, and we started off from the Guildhall, just like we did a few minutes ago, and I said to the group, now we're going into the bogside, and there was a man at the front and he was shaking his head, and then I said, Andrew, are you all right? And he said, Ronan, he said, The last time I was in your city was in 1973 as a young British Army soldier. And he referred to Northern Ireland as a soldier, as the Afghanistan of today. He said it was a desperate place. And, looking down, the Bogside was hard to believe. I mean, to think of all the people who were murdered in sectarian conflict down in this small area. Yeah. I mean, it's a tiny area, known as, like, the Bogside ends. You see where the green roof building is in the distance there? Draw a horizontal line. It's just everything just below is the Bogside. I mean, it's such a small area. I always said I'd love to have got married there. I was standing with a group here during the summer, and I was telling the group, I said, God, I said I'd love to have got married. And one of the groups said, why didn't you get married in there? And I said, well, my wife and I are not of the right faith. And I didn't realise but that the rector was standing listening to me, Rosemary Logue. And she said, Ronan, you should have just asked. And I said, maybe after 10 years, I said, we'll renew our vows. Yeah. And so a gorgeous little church. It's called St. Augustine. It's named after the Augustinian monks who would have come here in the early 14th century. The church itself dates back to 1823. But the site is said to be where Christianity was founded here in the early 6th century by our patron saint, St. Columb or St. Columba. St. Columb, St. Columba and St. Columcille are all the one man, and he left from here in 563 AD, where he founded a very famous monastery in a beautiful place called Iona in Scotland. Whether you call the city Derry or it was just a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, it was a wasp. There. I got stung by one 2 weeks ago, so I was just worried until I know. So this is the same saint that left from here and founded this monastery. But whether you call the city Derry or Londonderry, the Irish for Derry is Dara, which means an oak grove or a place of oak. So when Christianity was founded here, this whole area would have been forested with oak at one time. Unfortunately, there's really no oak left in the city today. I mean, all these trees that you see down here are obviously not oak trees, but sycamore trees. And so all of these oak trees were really sort of culled down during the industrialization period of the mid-1800s. The monument over here is a monument to commemorate a man by the name of Reverend George Walker, who was governor of this city during the Great Siege of Derry back in 1689. And there used to be a 60-foot high statue of George up there, but as you can see or not see, George is gone. Sometimes they say in business it's all about location, 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 and the problem with George was indeed his location. Despite being a great governor, he was a Protestant governor overlooking the Catholics. Let's just say they didn't see eye to eye, and unfortunately the IRA blew him up, and he's now behind the Apprentice Boys Memorial Hall for his own safekeeping, which is where he resides in comfort today. Follow me, ladies and gentlemen. Have any of you heard of the Orange Men?
Yes. Oh yeah.
And of course Orange because of King William of Orange and the celebration of King William of Orange's victories over the Catholic King James II. I'm saying this because this building here is the headquarters of the Apprentice Boys of Derry, and they also march like the Orange Men to celebrate King William of Orange's victories over the Catholic King James II. The Orange Men originally came from the Apprentice Boys originally came from London to help build these city walls as apprentice carpenters, masons, etc. But on completion of the walls, these boys stayed on, and many of them who are now obviously young adults, and they were responsible for closing the gates at night and took on other civic roles and duty. The next generation of them are still known as the Apprentice Boys. And it was that group of young men who were responsible for closing the gates against the Catholic King James II in December of 1688. And this began the longest siege in British military history, in which thousands of people died within these walls, not from fighting, but from starvation. The menu at the time, and it was a menu because you had to pay for it, were cats, dogs, mice and rats. You looking forward to your lunch today? No. We can do it Chinese style now. Yeah. 100 ways to walk your dog. Don't tell my mother I said that. Not let me in again. But you see how something that happened back in the 1600s still affects us today. I think to go back to the 1600s is so important in understanding the psychological impact all of this has had on us. And I'll tell you why, because the Orange Men still march, and the Orange Men are all Protestant, and these Protestant marches sometimes go through the Catholic areas. One side will tell you it's tradition, and the other side will tell you that it's triumphalism. Now, in many ways, the marches are a microcosm of the historic difficulties. The two sides see it two completely different ways. But we've had a lot of violence surrounding these marches over the last decade or so. Thankfully, in recent years, sense has prevailed for the most part. There were some disturbances in Belfast recently on July the 12th. I did notice that our Chief Constable referred to the violence as recreational rioting because he was focusing not on the religious aspect, but on antisocial behaviour. I mean, most people, you know, we'll all have an opinion on the march, but 99.9% of the people are not rioting because of it. And the people I saw up in court, you know, in the newspapers, with regards to the antisocial behaviour, are the same people I see in court every week. But, you know, the media like to focus on religion, but I like to focus on the antisocial element, because why is it always in Northern Ireland that the segregated areas, Catholic, Protestant, where the walls are and divisions are always located in the most economically deprived areas? You see, I have not been to a city in the world that doesn't have its good areas and its bad areas. But most people look on social and economic reasons. But here in Northern Ireland, we often mask it by focusing on religion. And that's why it's so crucial for our politicians today to focus not on the sectarian politics that have plagued us, but on real issues like, you know, housing and education and the health service. Things which we have forgotten really about over the last 40 years. This street, by the way, is called Society Street, after the Honourable the Irish Society. And they were the group who were entrusted with looking after the affairs for the London connections, for the London Corporation. This cathedral, by the way, in American connection with the cathedral, one of the most famous deans to have presided there was a dean called Dean Berkeley. And of course, he went to the United States of America, where you have Berkeley University of California and the Berkeley School of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, named after him. One of the most famous bishops to have presided there was a bishop called Frederick Augustus Hervey, the 4th Earl of Bristol. He was a very wealthy man, and a part of the reason for his wealth came from a drink called Hervey's or Harvey's Bristol Cream, a very famous chart.